We begin on this date, January 15th, a hinge in time that invites us to look back, not to wallow, but to learn. In the next 20 minutes, we travel through 5 moments, systemic failures where institutions, choices, and ordinary human errors converged into consequences that reshaped lives and laws. Each story is a cautionary mirror. We watch slow-motion reenactments, listen to implied expert soundbites, and let the images, faces, courtrooms, factory floors, neighborhoods speak. We open with flickering footage of trading floors, ticker tape, screens ablaze. On this date in our shared memory, America continued to feel the aftershocks of a crisis that wasn't sudden so much as cumulative, lending practices that outpaced oversight, incentives that rewarded short-term gain over long-term stability, risk models that mistook past trends for guarantees. Banks sliced loans into securities, sold risk around the world, and assumed that housing prices would always rise. Regulators were understaffed, analysts relied on flawed models, and rating agencies assigned safety to instruments that hid volatility beneath paperwork. We linger on a slow pan of foreclosure signs, the camera pausing on a child's bicycle left on a cracked driveway, an expert soundbite, implied, a former regulator describing a system optimized for profit, not prudence. What went wrong was structural, incentives misaligned, information asymmetric, and a culture that normalized taking on invisible risk. Consequences were immediate and devastating. Millions lost homes, jobs evaporated, and public trust in financial institutions plummeted. The lesson carried forward: when incentives outweigh accountability, systems fail. The reenactment shows a family around a kitchen table, bills spread out, hope turning into resignation. The narrator offers the moral urgency plainly: build systems that anticipate failure, not celebrate its unlikeliness. Regulation cannot be a veneer, it must be adaptive, resourced, and unafraid to challenge profitable myths. 30 years earlier, engineers had raised alarms about the O-rings at low temperatures. Meetings recorded in memos, voices carrying worry. In the weeks before launch, pressure from schedule, from political theater, and from an organizational culture that muffled dissent made risk seem negotiable. The night before liftoff, the temperature dipped well below the O-ring's tested range. A decision was made, the launch proceeded. We hear an implied soundbite from an engineer: "We knew, and we didn't stop it." The narrative focuses on systemic failure, not a single bungled bolt, but an organization where bad decisions became routine, where expediency trumped safety. The shuttle disintegrated, 7 lives were lost, families grieved, the nation mourned, and an inquiry revealed a sobering truth: when organizations normalize deviance, catastrophe waits at the margins. This segment slows on images of memorials, a quiet classroom with children tracing rocket outlines, then turns to the lesson: create cultures that welcome dissent, that elevate caution over optics. When leaders silence warnings, systems fail in ways that are irreversible. Archival photographs bring us to a thriving black neighborhood on May 31, 1921, streets bustling, a canopy of prosperity known as Black Wall Street. The Tulsa massacre was physical violence, but its deeper mistake was the failure of systems to protect, to remember, and to repair. For decades, policy choices, redlining maps, discriminatory lending, and intentional disinvestment turned prosperity into a relic. Neighborhoods that once sustained families were denied capital. Local institutions were weakened. Generational wealth was obstructed. Slow-motion B-roll lingers on vacancy signs and boarded windows, then on present-day efforts to reclaim history. An implied historian explains: policies created persistent gaps that law alone could not bridge. Consequences ripple across generations: health disparities, educational gaps, economic marginalization. The moral urgency here asks for more than apologies. It calls for structural remedies, reparative investments, honest curricula, and policy that dismantles systemic barriers rather than papering them over. We end this segment with a shot of community gardeners reclaiming, reminding us that rebuilding requires sustained political will and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. A slow dissolve into clinical hallways and sterile instruments shifts into grainy footage of men in porches. Long before experimental protocols became codified, the subject is stark. For 40 years, a study withheld treatment from black men infected with syphilis, not to help them, but to observe disease progression. Scientists framed it as research. The state rubber-stamped it. The ethical breach was total. We hear an implied soundbite from an ethicist describing a betrayal of trust that echoed through communities. The mistake was both moral and systemic: racist assumptions, inadequate oversight, and research ethics that privileged data over dignity. The consequences were brutality made bureaucratic, preventable suffering, premature deaths, and a legacy of deep mistrust in medical institutions that still affects vaccine uptake and health-seeking behavior. The lesson is clear and urgent. Research must be anchored in consent, transparency, and respect. Institutional review boards, informed consent, and community engagement exist because we failed before. Remembering is part of repair. Trust, once broken, demands action, not just reassurance. We pan over ballots, polling places, and long lines under midday sun. Then a map overlays the screen, showing districts redrawn, rules tightened. The narrative adopts a legal beat cadence. Voting is the mechanism by which societies correct mistakes. Yet throughout history, policymakers have used laws, technology, and bureaucracy to limit access. From literacy tests and poll taxes to purges of registration rolls and restrictive ID laws, the pattern is consistent. Cost imposition to deter participation. Some changes were overtly discriminatory. Others hid behind neutral language that disproportionately affected marginalized communities. An implied civil rights attorney provides a soundbite. When access is curtailed, representation frays. The consequences are profound. Policies that shape life outcomes are decided by fewer voices, often those least affected. The long arc of reform requires vigilance, litigation, and policy that centers inclusion. We see slow-motion footage of volunteers helping voters, of mobile registration drives, of legal teams arguing in courts. The lesson is explicit. Democracy requires constant maintenance. Transparency, access, and protection from manipulation are not political luxuries, they are civic necessities. Each failure arises from similar anatomy: incentives that reward the wrong behavior, cultures that punish dissent, laws that entrench inequality, and institutions that prioritize image over integrity. Mistakes are rarely accidents. They are produced by systems. We watch implied experts, historians, ethicists, economists in quick succession summarize vigilance, accountability, and the redistribution of power mitigate mistakes. Infrastructure is the quiet backbone of safety, but deferred maintenance and short-term budgeting leave it brittle. On this date, we reflect on storms that revealed a larger mistake, treating infrastructure as expense rather than investment. The reenactment shows repair crews racing as rain intensifies, municipal meetings where budgets are slashed, and officials choosing visibility projects over underground resilience. An implied civil engineer offers a refrain: patching over time leads to catastrophic failure. Consequences are human and economic. Neighborhoods displaced, businesses shuttered, and ecosystems altered. The lesson is administrative and moral. Prioritize preventive spending, incorporate climate projections into planning, and center the most vulnerable in adaptive work. When only reactive measures are funded, the bill, literal and moral, becomes enormous. The systemic failure is not merely individual misconduct. It's the architecture of secrecy. HR processes that prioritize legal shielding, non-disclosure agreements that hide patterns, and leaders who respond with denial. Consequences compound. Victims suffer, institutions lose credibility, and cultures become predatory. The necessary lessons are structural: independent reporting mechanisms, transparent investigations, survivor-centered policies, and leadership accountable to external standards. Safety cannot be optional. The camera pulls back, and we take stock. Across the 5 stories, a map of remedies emerges. Accountability must be real, not performative. Regulators need teeth and resources. Whistleblowers require protection. Communities harmed by policy deserve reparative strategies, not symbolic niceties. Public investments should anticipate futures, not just service present comforts. We visit small victories in slow motion: a retooled regulatory agency enforcing new rules, a memorial school curriculum teaching difficult truths, clinics co-designed with community leaders, voter outreach finally turning long lines into access, and cities investing in green infrastructure that keeps neighborhoods dry. None of these are panaceas, but they are proof that repair is possible when systems change. The narrator's tone grows quietly insistent. Learning history means translating remorse into institutional redesign. It means asking not just what happened, but who benefited and who paid. It means making structures transparent and designing incentives that reward prevention. Design for failure. Assume systems will encounter stress and build redundancy. Incentivize long-term outcomes. Align pay and promotion with safe, equitable results. Center the vulnerable. Prioritize those most likely to be harmed when deciding policy. Protect dissent. Create channels where warnings are heard and rewarded. Invest preventively. Infrastructure, health, and education budgets must be forward-looking. Enforce transparency. Data, audits, and public oversight deter hidden harms. Each item is followed by a micro-reenactment, a regulator reading a clear report, a community board signing an agreement, a school teaching truth-telling about the past. The message remains friendly but firm. These are not abstract prescriptions, they are the scaffolding of a more resilient society. We are not here to indict for the sake of blame alone. Investigation is an act of care, the careful sifting of evidence so society can learn and do better. We end with a montage. Faces of ordinary Americans, teachers, laundromat owners, engineers, nurses, voters in a long line, overlaid with quiet archival frames. Mistakes are part of our collective story. They become tragedies when ignored, and they become lessons when honestly confronted. The systems that shape life can be redesigned, institutions can be held to account, and communities can be made wholer if we refuse to treat history as something that only happens to other people. Today, on this day, the responsibility is ours. To remember clearly, to legislate wisely, and to demand institutions that dignify lives rather than gamble with them. Which of these broken promises do you think was the hardest to mend? And what promise do you think America is in danger of breaking next? Let's have that crucial discussion below. If you believe history's hardest lessons are the ones we most need to remember, please like, subscribe, and share this video.